Hey everyone, Chris here from IELTS Advantage with the IELTS VIP Podcast. So let me explain what the VIP Podcast is. So we work with a very small number of students in our VIP course, and once a week we ask them for an idea for a podcast. So this is their chance for me to go really deep on one specific topic and do like a 10-20 minute podcast on one very particular area of the IELTS test. And we had a really good suggestion this week, which is the particular characteristics of Western essay writing or academic writing. And this is a really good topic because it's one of the main reasons why many of you struggle with IELTS writing. And it's not because you're bad at writing or even that your language is bad per se. It's because you are unfamiliar with how people in the Western world or the English-speaking world, whatever way you want to talk about it, is the way that they write essays. And this is much like culture shock. If you move to a country that is completely different to your country, then they might do things a little bit differently to you. Now that doesn't mean one is better than the other or even that everybody does it that way, but it will just be unusual to you. So my wife is from Vietnam, and when she first moved here to Northern Ireland, there were a few things that she found really strange. For example, whenever we were going to call around to a member of my family, we would call ahead and like kind of make an appointment, where she found that really strange because in Vietnam you just go around and hang out with your family. You don't need to make a big deal of it. And the same thing is when I moved to Vietnam, one of the strange things for me was at dinner time, everybody kind of eats from the food in the middle of the table. No one really has their own meals. And again, this is not one is better than the other. It's just through thousands of years of culture, that's the way people do things. And the same it's exactly the same when it comes to writing. So I'm not going to go into the way that every single culture writes an essay. What I'm going to talk about are the distinguishing characteristics of Western essay writing, especially the ones that my students say are quite strange or they find it difficult to grasp. And that will help you compare that to how you write in your culture. And because at the end of the day, the IELTS test is designed for people who want to move to the UK, Ireland, Canada, Australia. So the wrong thing to do is be like, I don't like that way and I write my way, and in my country I write that way. If you have that attitude, you're never going to get the score that you need. You have to learn and you have to adapt, just in the same way as if you do get the IELTS score you need, you're going to have to adapt to the country that you're moving to. So one of the things that many students find difficult to grasp is the fact that in Western essays or English-speaking essays, people generally get to the main point at the very beginning of the essay. So this could be a thesis statement, or this could be the main ideas right in your introduction. And many students find this very strange. It's like, why are you basically answering the question in the first sentence or the first paragraph? Because they have been taught that you only really reveal the answer or the thesis or the main point towards the end of the essay. So that can be quite strange for many people, and I've even had students argue with me that you shouldn't do that, you should never do that, and this comes from just their teachers in their high school or their primary school teaching that, and it is kind of ingrained in them. So that is the first point, and that is a bit strange. So it is getting used to how an introduction is formed and what the purpose of an introduction, and improving that and improving your ability to write that. And then also the overall structure of an essay in an English-speaking country will generally be you introduce it, then the main body will be you develop it or you go into detail on your main points, and then the conclusion will be a summary of your main points. So the best way to think about it is the introduction is telling the reader, this is what I'm going to talk about, this is really me answering the question. And then the main body is, this is the detail, or this is the evidence, here's my explanations and my examples, my main points. And then the conclusion is, here's a summary of what just happened above. And for many people, they find that difficult to understand because A, they just don't use that structure. They use a different way of writing an essay. But many people think that that's unusual because they think you're repeating yourself. And in some cultures, you are taught to not repeat the same points and to meander through the essay and just talk about different things at different times. So especially when it comes to the same points being in the introduction and the conclusion, many people have a problem with that. And they say, well, why did you talk about both? And if you go and look at, any journal article, like an academic article that you'll find in any, if you study in university, you'll look at the beginning, it'll be a summary of the main points, and at the end it'll be a summary of the main points. So they are repeating themselves, and it's really just to help the reader understand what is going on, and that's how most essays are ordered. And that brings me on to the next point, that there generally will be a very logical order to what is going on. As I've just mentioned, introduction, introducing the points, and then in order, this is point number 1, you deal with that. This is point number 2, you deal with that. This is point number 3, you deal with that. So it's very ordered and very structured, and there's a logical progression to the essays, where in some cultures that isn't really valued. It isn't about having a logical order or a logical structure. Other things are valued, such as showing off your vocabulary, which we'll come to in a second, or just discussing things from many different angles and many different points of view. Again, I'm not going to talk about every single way of writing an essay from every single part of the world. That would be impossible. But that is one of the hallmarks of a Western style essay, which is a clear, linear progression. The other thing that you'll find in Western countries is they're more individualistic compared to some countries in the East, which will be more collectivist. And because of that, people in the West in their essays will tend to have very, very clear-cut opinions on things. Whereas if you come from a more collectivist society, you might talk about things from many different angles and not really have a very, very clear opinion, a personal opinion on something. So you might talk about some people like this, some people think this, some people think that, and not really say what you think. Whereas a Western essay might do that as well. This side thinks this side thinks that, but they will also have a very clear-cut opinion, and it will be very clear what their position is on the question. And this used to drive me crazy when I was teaching students, like, why didn't you answer the question? Why did you not tell me what you think about the question? And it took many years to realize that they had just been taught from a very young age not to do that, not to have that clear opinion. Again, not every single student is like that, and not every culture is like that, but it is a problem that I recognized in some cultures. The second last difference will be the difference in the type of language that you use. In some cultures, they see essays as a chance to be poetic or use very flowery language and to show off their nice poetic prose, whereas if you're at university, for example, in the West, if you're at university in London or Toronto or whatever, that's not really valued. You are using very precise functional language. You're not showing off your vocabulary. Now, that doesn't mean that Western essays don't have very high level vocabulary in them, but it's only used when it has to be used. Most of the time it will be very functional and very to the point type language. Whereas a lot of the students who start working with me, one of the very first things we do is just like, stop showing off, stop using very flowery poetic language, understand that vocabulary and grammar is used in the West just as a tool to clearly communicate what you're thinking about, or what your argument is. And that brings me on to the last point, which is in Western culture, the purpose of writing an essay is basically twofold. One, to clearly communicate with the reader so that the reader understands what you think about this. And a lot of the time it's also to have a very clear argument. This is what I think. Not argue as in, you know, punching people or shouting at people, but think about yourself as more like how a lawyer would argue their case in court. This is exactly what I think, here are the reasons, and then therefore you have to justify your positions. You don't just say, I think this, without explaining why you think this and providing evidence. So that's why a lot of people have difficulty with explanations and examples. They'll say, I think this, I think this, I think this, but there won't be any explanation or any evidence to support that, which is something that you must put into a Task 2 essay. So hopefully that makes sense. It would be great to hear from you guys to understand the differences in your culture and how you have been taught to write an essay that's very, very, very different to that. And again, I think it's worth reiterating the point that don't get frustrated and just think, oh, it's so different, why do they do it that way? You're not going to change thousands of years of culture, and IELTS are not going to change their test because you have been taught a different way. It would be impossible to have like a universal global way of writing, because everyone is so different, and you know that's a valuable thing. But if you want to be doing the IELTS test, you have to learn the IELTS way of doing it. And it's not really the IELTS way of doing it, it's, you know, how writing is supposed to be, generally supposed to be, in Western English-speaking cultures. And it's very, very useful to know that as well, because especially if you're moving to a Western country and attending a university, for example, or doing postgraduate studies or something like that, you will be expected to write that way. And you will improve your university grade by doing it that way. So hopefully that was interesting. As always, it'll be interesting to see your comments, and thank you very much, guys. If you need any help, feel free to go to our website, IELTSadvantage.com, where you'll find all the free help that you need. Check out our Facebook page, our YouTube channel, and if you need extra help, feel free to get in touch via email, chris@IELTSadvantage.com. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.